Helen is running through a building, into the lift and out onto the road. All of a sudden her father is seen bouncing from the building down at the ground before her and she is struck by a passing taxi. A few time afterward, she is lying comatose in a healing center bed. A voice inquires her not to disregard him and she opens her eyes. Helen's spouse, Greg, arrives to visit her. He uncovers that she has been in a coma for fair over a year. He guarantees to require her domestic before long, where they can be a family. Helen really overseen to grant birth whilst she was within the coma. Greg returns with their girl, Heidi, and presents her to her mother. Helen is gone by analyst Shepard. He is attempting to wrap up the case of her father's passing. An observer detailed seeing her run from the building in trouble and so he inquires around her relationship with her father. She cannot keep in mind but he inquires her to call him in case she reviews anything vital. As Greg takes Helen from the clinic, he concedes that he had to offer their house and they are presently broke. They presently live in her father's old apartment. Helen is truly awkward almost living there. Whereas Greg puts the child to rest, Helen looks around the flat, recalling her father. Greg takes her into her father's ancient thinkabout which he proposes that they make into an craftsmanship studio for her. Helen appears to be battling to bond with Heidi and her disappointments drive Greg to intervene. Over time, Helen begins to be able to walk with the help of bolsters and she begins to sort out her studio. Recollections of her childhood begin to rise. She presses a button on the answer phone and listens her father's voice. A message has moreover been cleared out from a fellow named Straight to the Point, an ancient companion of her father's. Helen goes to visit Straight to the Point who clarifies that he knew her father from the church, but they had floated separated and he hadn't seen him for a long time, sometime recently his passing. Helen tells him that her father said something to her on the night of his passing and she ought to keep in mind. Straight to the Point tells her it's best to put these things to rest. Exterior. Helen can see some kids playing and all of a sudden contains a vision of one of them with awful zombified confront. Her nose begins to drain and Straight to the Point goes to get her a tissue. Helen returns domestic and Greg inquires where she has been. They have been joined by Trisha, her well-being guest. Helen had overlooked her arrangement. Trisha takes note that Heidi has a few bruises on her leg and Greg tells Helen that she has to take care. As Trisha takes off, Helen goes up against her around what she truly considers happened to Heidi. Trisha is befuddled as to why Helen is so suspicious. Before long after, Greg tosses a welcome domestic party. One of the neighbors, Mr. Mulvaney, comes to talk with Helen. He holds Heidi whereas Helen goes to discover Greg. He is talking with Father Monroe who communicates his condolences for her father's passing. Helen inquires on the off chance that he knows why her father kicked the bucket that way. The cleric says no, sometime recently. Moving on. Straight to the Point arrives at the party and Greg requests to know why she has welcomed him there. Afterward, Straight to the Point strolls past the nursery and Greg inquires him why he is here. Helen catches the discussion on the child screen. Straight to the Point tells Greg that his claim girl vanished when she was more youthful. The taking after day, Greg takes off town for a couple of days for work. Straight to the Point pays Helen a visit and the conversation almost his girl. Over the next few days, spooky figures begin to seem in Helen's flat. So she goes to the police station and talks with criminologist Shepard. She inquires him his supposition on what happens to us when we pass on. She considers that her father may be attempting to remind her what he said to her on the night of his passing. He considers that perhaps she is talking to the off-base individual. Helen afterward meets with the psychic examiner named Stu and explains that she has been seeing things. He conducts a seance and starts by attempting to contact her father. Helen begins to feel clever and abruptly there's a tall-pitched shout through the child screen. Helen holds her ears as Stu composes in his scratch pad. A while later he uncovers that he composed 6 names and inquires on the off chance that they cruel anything to her. She says no, but he considers that they are lost souls who can't get into paradise. He says that they have focused on her and won't fair go absent. Helen sees a small young lady on a bike and shouts. Helen goes online to rummage around for the 6 names. She finds that these were the names of 6 kids that went lost from a town called Stoneworth. Helen goes to visit the family of one of the lost kids. One of the guardians appears her pictures that his child drew, one of which could be a drawing of somebody that the kids called Sackhead. She then visits the mother of another lost young lady. The day sometime recently she went missing. She claimed to have been taken after domestic by a man with no stand up to. She was panicked, so her mother made her ride her bike on. The detectives confront when she told her, as she clearly accepted her. Helen at that point goes to visit the resigned analyst, Jillian Burrows. Helen inquires her almost the vanishing of these kids, and inquiries in case she ever came over the title Sackhead. Jillian says that she once gotten a phone call from somebody that never talked, but she is persuaded that it was the individual that the kids called Sackhead, the killer. Helen arrives domestic and Mr. Mulvaney inquires in the event that she plans to have any more kids, as he recalls how forlorn she appeared as a young lady. He tells her that he recalls her moving there when she was 4. Indeed, in spite of the fact that Helen caught on that she had been born in that building. Mr. Mulvaney uncovers that they moved there from the town of Stoneworth. Helen checks her father's papers and finds that usually genuine. She calls straight to the point and inquires how well he knew her father. She finds that his daughter's title was moreover on Stu's list. Analyst Shepard is on his way to the flat. Heidi begins to shout, and as Helen looks for her, she is gone up against by the spirits. Helen hollers and Shepard breaks in, but all he finds is Helen crying and Heidi on her possess. At the station, Shepard tells her that he has been keeping an eye on her. He tells her that she should conversation to him or he will need to call Child Security Administrations. She tries to tell him what he needs to listen, but that creates him irate. By the by, Helen is permitted to take off with Heidi. Exterior, Greg is holding up for her. He tells her that he shouldn't have cleared out her alone with Heidi, but after in contention, Greg tells her that he is clearing out her and taking their girl with him. As Greg collects his assets, Helen begins to encounter dreams of children, one of whom places a box in her room entryway. Manually written letter containing the address of her childhood domestic. She goes to examine, and as spooky child figures show up, she begins to burrow within the cultivate. Inevitably, Helen reveals a cranium. The police arrive and Shepard sits and talks with Helen. She questions how she didn't know what her father did and inquires how numerous there were. She accepts that her father will go unpunished, but Shepard tells her that that's unless she accepts in hell. Helen goes to see Father Monroe for a few otherworldly direction. He guarantees her that the book of scriptures affirms that she will not be rebuffed for the sins of her father. She cites sacred text to him and he inquires her why she gave up coming to church. She inquires why God allows so much torment and fiendish within the world. He accepts that man was given free will, which free will permits him to incur enduring. Helen inquires in case she is paying for her possessions or those of her father. Father Monroe all of a sudden uncovers that he knew almost her father's sins as he confessed to him. Helen clears out in a poll. Jillian listens around the discovered bodies and inquires for Helen's address, as well as to be kept upgraded on any encourage improvements. Helen calls Stu and tells him that she should contact her father. He exhorts her and she makes contact with him. She tells him that she will never excuse him, and after that encounters the minute of his passing. She finds a broken picture of her and her father on the floor, and as she opens the outline, she finds that the photo inside has been collapsed and straight to the point is additionally within the picture. Greg arrives with Heidi to visit Helen, but he is slaughtered within the carport by an obscure figure. Helen comes to the carport and gets into her car to take off fare. As Jillian arrives, she finds Greg's body on the ground. His voicemail is ringing and Jillian answers. Helen has cleared out him a message telling him to require Heidi to his mom's and to meet her at Frank's house. Jillian finds that Heidi has been snatched. Helen arrives at Frank's house to discover the entryway resting slightly open. She strolls in and finds him. He invites her domestic and uncovers that she is, in reality, his girl Anna. Helen recalls the night of her father's passing. He told her that he wasn't her father. Her father was a killer, but he kept quiet and snatched her from straight to the point who was his brother and arranged to keep her secure. Straight to the point apologizes for being an awful father. There's a clamor from the other room. Shepard gets news that a little young lady has been stolen. They gotten 2 calls, the primary from the man that snatched her. He gave his address. Helen finds a small young lady chained up in Frank's house. As she looks around, she finds that straight to the point includes a pillage over his head. Frank asks her around Hottie and she requests to know where her girl is. He tells her that she is inquiring the off-base questions and headbutts her. He questions in case she can take a life to spare a life. As Helen shouts, "There's a discharge," and Jillian appears up having shot straight to the point. Jillian is taken missing by the police. The criminologists are still burrowing up the bodies within the cultivate, but they